elections now, so hopefully the deliberations.
Should be a politician. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's Executive Committee. A busy agenda, but we will get through it. So, first of all, any apologies, and I've got two at the moment, which is Councillor Ruth Williams and Councillor Amal Hussain. Got the minutes of the 1st of November. Are you in agreement? I'll assign those as a true record. Moved, seconded. Thank you very much. All those in favour? Yep, thank you. Declarations of interest. If you've got any declarations, please make that known to us before the item starts. We have got potentially for part 2 item, 2 reports, and we'll come up that to the appropriate time. There are no questions from members of the public, so I'll move straight into agenda 6, which is members' allowances, and we have a series of recommendations here which are before you. I think we need to read them all out. So if we accept those are the recommendations, and I believe we've got Derek Phillips to come along and tell us about your report, Derek.
Press the button. Okay. Thank you. I think it's a fairly straightforward report this year, which you've got before you. This was obviously the first review we had post-COVID, so that was quite interesting anyway. But I think there are some areas that you need to look at, and we are going to have a rather longer session, I think, as the panel next year. One of them, of course, is the allowances. You have always followed the pay award to local government staff, and that's in that report for this year. But you realise that next year it's a lump sum rather than a percentage, and I think you'll need to consider that. Some other local authorities that have gone for the average that works out, which is just over 4%, I think, on that side. I think the only other thing to draw attention to is that you have always had the view that only 50% of councillors should be receiving a special responsibility allowance. You've gone over that, but because of the custom that only one allowance is paid, you do come nearer to 50%. So I think it's just something that you will need to bear in mind, perhaps as you go forward, that we do need to, I think, unless you change your policy, which I think is normal policy in most local authorities, that only half of the councillors receive a special responsibility allowance. Doesn't really make any, it doesn't sound like a special responsibility allowance if more than 50% are receiving it. So it's just something I think to bear in mind. Other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions on behalf of the panel.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any contributions on that? No? But on that point, what you said, happy to hear what you say about it, the panel say it rather than talk about it. But just to remind you that 50% was there before we increased the number of allowances. That could be a 10, for example. Opposition leaders, things like that, unless you're proposing to stop all that, you know, to fall in line with the 50%, which would be not what we would want to do. So we would leave it to you to come forward, but that's like an old test, so you need to update that as well. If there's nobody else, I'll come to Councillor Wright, the portfolio audit. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just very quickly to clarify for everybody, we are over the 50%, but it's only 51%. So if we took a person out of that, then we would be on 40-something percent.
That's correct.
If my maths are right. So it's not, we're not looking at 75% of councillors at all, it's 51%. So that's as near as we can get it.
Yep, well, thank you. As I say, I think that would be a matter for the remuneration committee to come back and make a recommendation to us rather than us trying to manage it. That's the same with what they do next year. We are a year behind, and that's absolutely fine with me, and we'll go along with what the panel says. So, those are the recommendations before you. I'll formally move them from the chair. Can I have a seconder? All those in favour?
That's a unanimous vote, Chair. The recommendations have been carried.
Okay, so it's not quite as they run in the morning paper. I am moving around the agenda a little bit to allow people. Yes, thank you, Derek.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
And just so you know where we're coming from, we're doing item 7 next, and item 15, and then back to number 8. So item 7 is the amendment to the terms of reference of the Joint Consultation Committee, and this is something that we have to do with the unions, and we've got one recommendation here that we recommend and council approve the amendments to the council's constitution with reference to the JCNC. This is the negotiating body with the trade unions. Barn, would you like to introduce your paper, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. This is a really straightforward report. We just like to keep up to date with our terms of reference. So if I highlight to you what the main changes are, and there are only a few, on page 33, you'll see the composition of the meeting. Used to be 3 officers, 2 from Unison and 1 from Unite, and we're changing that to the composition to be members of SMB, the service lead for HR, and 1 officer from each recognised union, which is JMB and Unite currently. And then on page 34, we've changed the quorum because it used to be 2 trade union reps, and we've brought that down to 1 because currently we only have 1 trade union rep. And if we didn't correct that, the meetings will not be quorate. And the final one is in relation to joint secretary. We don't have a joint secretary. The meetings are organised by our Joe Cannell. So you'll see that we simply change that to reflect the reality of how we run the meetings. So, Chair, that was all I have to say, but happy to take questions.
Thank you, Barn. Do we have any contributions or questions? Okay, good to see the unions are back in vogue nationally, but they've always been in vogue in this council. So we've got those recommendations in front of you. All those in favour of the recommendation, please show.
That's a unanimous vote, Chair. The recommendations have been carried.
Thank you. And now we'll go straight on to item 15 now, and I'll ask Duncan Wood to present the recommendations. I don't believe you need to read them in full, Councillor Wood, but just highlight what these recommendations will lead to. Thank you.
I guess we're not going to have them up on the screen as available, but right. Recommendations are that members note and endorse the corporate carbon footprint report. That members acknowledge the scale of the challenge set out in the corporate carbon footprint report. That members acknowledge the importance of the corporate carbon reduction plan, and that members note to achieve net zero by 2030 will require an increase in capacity, financial investment, and operational resource, both internally and from government at a national level. Whilst the carbon footprint provides accurate carbon reduction measures, the precise amount of resource needed is currently not quantifiable. This will require a detailed investment plan based on costed proposals. The final recommendation is that members recommend the net zero team research options for achieving net zero in the use of carbon offsetting.
Thank you, Councillor. So this report is going to be led in by Joe Pearce, Corporate Energy Manager, and then with a presentation from Tony Norton of Exeter University. Joe, Tony, do you want to come up a bit nearer? Come and join us. That's it. You're coming in focus with every step you take with me.
I think Tony can ensure we can
Yep.
manage the presentation.
Yeah, there you are, Tony. All right, you're down there.
Thank you for the opportunity to present the report tonight. I will hand over to Tony, who's going to cover the details within the carbon footprint report. I think only to add to Councillor Wood's introduction section there that we can't measure what, manage what we don't measure. So the report is a big step forward for the authority. It allows us to understand our own emissions and the opportunities that are available to us to achieve our ambition to be net zero by 2030. There are lots of positives that I'd like to share with you tonight. That we are doing lots of good work that's being delivered as I speak, such as the solar farm and electrification for our fleet and transport, and various other solar and boiler replacement projects that we're delivering. And internally, our carbon literacy training has been very popular with all staff at the Civic Centre, and members will soon undertake that same training. And it is really allowing everyone to be on board and for us all to own this commitment. And I think that's very important. And I'd just like to share my concerns. You know, that there are barriers to achieving net zero, and they're not just capacity, funding, and technology. It really is about pulling together all the resources and having everyone on board to take on this challenge. And I'm very, whilst that's a concern, I'm also optimistic that we can achieve that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jo. So, Tony, if you'd like to run through your slides, assuming that most of us has at least had more than a glance of your report. So if you want to highlight the fundamental things to us, that would be best for our memory retention. Thank you. Try that one.
Okay, thank you very much. So clearly the council declared a net zero ambition of 2030, and this project was to look at the corporate carbon footprint, both direct and indirect emissions, including a supply chain. So in technical language, that's scope 1, 2, and scope 3 emissions. And we worked to assess the potential to achieve that. Now, it's based on consultation with obviously key documents and data sources, appraisal of central government policy, and very importantly, input from the council's service leads and officers. And our initial step was clearly to create the current footprint, which is shown here. So that's the 2021 footprint, and the total was something over 50,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. Now that splits down into 7 sectors that we analysed individually: non-domestic buildings, housing, transport, procurement, F-gases, which is what you find in refrigeration and heat pumps, and waste, renewable energy offsets, and land use change and afforestation, the potential for offsets there too. So we looked at each of those sectors, and the figures in brackets down the right-hand side of those sectors give you the split in the current carbon footprint. So our first task was to look at non-domestic buildings, and this graph shows how that's currently split out. So the blue sector on the left is the corporate estate, and the largest square is the museum, with the bottom left-hand square being the civic centre, and then you can see the other buildings and energy uses fitting in smaller squares in the blue. The predominantly orange sector is the leisure activity, the leisure centres, and you can see the different leisure centres there, with the pyramids on the left, and so on and so forth. Then we've got car parking, which uses energy, therefore emits CO2, believe it or not, and the other smaller sectors down to the bottom right, including right at the bottom right, the public conveniences, which have a footprint of their own. So when we were looking at buildings, we had building data to a good level from Joe's team, and you can clearly see from that previous diagram that about 80% is from the corporate estate and the leisure centres. So they are the main non-domestic building emitters. And the split is about 60% electricity and 40% gas in terms of emissions. Opportunities we identified, well, there's a national opportunity, if you like, in terms of our electricity is decarbonising, because nationally renewables are increasingly penetrating the grid, and meaning that our electricity is becoming greener as time goes on and more renewables come on, displacing natural gas and other fossil sources. We looked at potential asset management and changes in assets, energy efficiency, very importantly. And I've got a graph on energy efficiency here. So this graph shows electricity in orange and gas in grey, and the sorts of energy efficiency measures we saw as being potentially available. Now, it doesn't look great, but we're looking at perhaps a 20% reduction, 26% reduction in gas and a 20% reduction in electricity due to energy efficiency. And then we looked at renewable energy and decarbonising heat and the role that could play. And for each sector, we produce what we call a waterfall graph, and this is the first one of those. And we split the timeline into two. So we did from now to 2025 section, and then to the right in this next graph, you'll see from 2025 to 2030. And this gets a bit repetitive, but you'll see one of these for each of the sectors. So here we have what's going on with non-domestic buildings. So we see the emissions there in 2021, and then what we've scheduled in for in red. So red are increases and green are decreases, and here the red bar is what we've estimated for COVID bounce back. So if you remember, these numbers were in the depths of the pandemic, and so the energy use in buildings was down from what it would normally be. So we predicted, about 1,000 tons here would be what happened when buildings started to be reused in the normal way. And then we had a couple of other small increases, and then followed by grid decarbonisation in green, which is actually one of the major factors across sectors that use electricity, and then energy efficiency, taking us to 2025. And then beyond 25 for non-domestic buildings, we see again grid decarbonisation cutting in, and importantly, then we start to see the largest sector, the -584, being decarbonising heat, taking us down from our initial estimate of 2,200 down to about 600 tons of CO2. So a significant decline, but not zero. And we'll see that throughout, that we make big indents on carbon emissions through our aggressive carbon reduction policies, but we tend not to get to zero. So the next sector moving on for non-domestic buildings is the council's housing stock. Now, of course, ECC own but don't occupy, so emissions are estimated from detailed address level energy performance certificate records, because we don't have access to your tenants' energy bills. So we've had to estimate these. Approximately 75% are emissions from gas for heating and hot water. And the opportunities to decarbonise were, of course, to continue building passive house where we're building new buildings. There's a small potential for easy energy efficiency gains, but the council's housing stock is good, and those are limited. We can apply solid wall insulation, but again, there's not many cases. And then we come on to decarbonising heat, whole house retrofit, putting PV on every dwelling, and looking at the benefits from grid decarbonisation. And the waterfall chart for housing looks like this. And I think the most notable thing there is the big green bar there, which is decarbonising heat in homes. And that's the impact of putting air source heat pumps in all the homes. And when it comes to decarbonising, when you've got very efficient stock already, this is what's needed to really deliver low carbon in housing stock. Moving on to transport, well, we looked at the entire swathe of transport, so obviously direct ECC owned transport and refuse vehicles were responsible for knocking on for 60% of direct emissions, but also street cleaning and public and green spaces vehicles are part of the own fleet emissions. Most of that's predominantly diesel, with a small amount of petrol equipment from green space, which is a little bit more difficult to decarbonise in some instances. Then looking at the indirect emissions, there's business travel and grey feet, but it's very small, and you can see that in the grey and yellow lines in the graph on the right there. And commuting, is small, but post-COVID perhaps more significant. But our data on commuting for council employees is not particularly good. The opportunities in terms of decarbonisation, well, clearly fleet replacement by electric. We're assuming 100% electric vehicles in the fleet by 2030. A reduction in mileage, of course, helps. It needs to be a combination of less use and electrification. And we assume sort of national average uptake of electric vehicles for commuting and so forth, with some electrification of specialist vehicles. So the waterfall in transport looks like this, and I bet you can quickly guess what the big green bars are, the electrification process that needs to take place. And again, some residual emissions there really indicate the difficulty of decarbonising some of the direct emissions from transport, because you don't, whilst you have control over your own fleet, you have less control over commuting and employee emissions that are indirect. So that's transport. The main sector in emissions, and this is not unusual at all, is actually Scope 3 procurement. And here we have some trouble really quantifying exactly what procurement emissions are, because the method we use at the moment is based on spend. And only 4% of the emissions from procurement could be taken from activity data. And spend data is, well, not a particularly accurate way. And when it comes to reducing emissions, the only way to reduce them if you're relying on spend data is cutting your spend, which isn't particularly helpful, shall we say. So there's a lot of work to do around supply chains and identifying what emissions come with what you spend your money on. So improving data in that area is really important. Considering the need, for example, for new buildings, as opposed to reorganising, extending, refurbishing existing buildings. Construction and embodied carbon targets can be set to help with construction emissions. And for everything else, perhaps when you're looking at procurement, making emissions part of the selection process for the contractor that you select. So the waterfall chart for procurement looks like this, and there's a big green bar there on the left, which kind of assumes that St Sid wasn't built again, because that was in the data for the year that we looked at. And you can see how, in that instance, construction of new buildings can make a major impact on your emissions. If you're building a new building, your emissions, your procurement Scope 3 emissions, are going to be higher. And you can see there are a range of other changes that are needed in the procurement area. This is from the Treasury, actually, Greenbrook, showing just working a bit on construction and building, showing how that if we build efficiently, we can save 20%, but equally, if we don't build anything, everything can be saved. And that sort of highlights the challenges of building clever and building less, or perhaps not building at all. And construction is such a big part of procurement emissions, as we've shown in that. One way of tackling construction emissions is to use the London Energy Transformation Initiative's standards here for new build. I mean, typically at the moment, looking at those charts, new build is around level E. But if we can specify when we're looking at new build to have upfront carbon or embodied carbon at A or A+, clearly that's going to make a big difference to the amount of embodied emissions in your build. And then, of course, we can move on to procurement, to the circular economy, and minimising, what we use and using the recycle, remanufacture, reuse, repair circular economy model for reducing procurement spend. F-gas and waste is really a small category. There's not a lot of data on waste, but I think we can always assume that an organisation's waste will be a relatively small part of its footprint. We assess this at 3 tonnes, which really shows how small compared to over 50,000 waste is as a part of the footprint. F-gases. Well, I think the concern about F-gases, and you'll see this in the waterfall chart, which works the other way for F-gases, in as much as if we're putting a lot of heat pumps in and they have F-gases in them, there's a danger of leakage. Nationally, we're looking to reduce the emissions from F-gases, so putting low emissions F-gases in new appliances, so that should help. But we need to be aware, if we're installing a lot of heat pumps across the housing stock, that F-gas leakage is a potential source of new emissions. Renewable energy, of course, the council's done brilliantly on renewable energy, already over 2 megawatts of capacity, reducing emissions. Unfortunately, this is one area where the decarbonisation of the grid works against things, because as the grid decarbonises, the offsets reduce. So here you'll see that although there's a massive amount of new capacity programmed to go in between now and 2030, the reductions are less impressive than you'd think. And this graph actually shows exactly what that. So you're exporting the amount of energy, PV energy, that the projections show that could be exported. You don't get the same return because of the decarbonisation of the grid in terms of carbon. Nonetheless, renewable energy is vital in saving money and providing the support to the national scheme to decarbonise the grid. Land use change and afforestation we also looked at. So how much does tree planting affect that? We looked at planting 25% of the land the City Council owns. And here you can see the carbon savings from that, about 700 tonnes of CO2 from planting 25% of the available area with broadleaf trees. We looked at other options, but that was the one that we took. And then, of course, we can add up all these waterfall charts together to get an overall impression when we combine the sectors of what's coming out of each sector. So we can see the initial 2021 footprint of 52,500 tonnes there. Procurement, of course, making a big impact. And of course, if we remember back to that procurement charge, not building St Sidwell's is a large part of that, which takes us down to the 2025. And then moving on, housing's making a major contribution. If we think back to what the biggest bar on housing was, it was the decarbonisation of heat. And again, procurement playing a role, with everything else, or while important, playing a minor role relative to that Scope 3 procurement hit. So we did do in the report, and if you look at it, we did some numbers without procurement in it, which, if you like, excludes that major Scope 3 procurement, which you have less control over, and really focuses in on the things you have more control over for the time being. Not to say that we shouldn't be reducing procurement emissions in the long term. So this is the summary chart in terms of where emissions are coming from. And I think, the take home is the point I've already made, that although we achieve a 79% reduction in overall emissions, of the remaining emissions, 76%, that grey bar on the right-hand side in 2030, is residual procurement emissions that are difficult to tackle. So in summary, this was analysis at a point in time. It's not intended to be deterministic. It's a series of illustrative examples. As information improves, the council's plan needs to adapt, and I'm sure will. The critical factors that we identified was delivery of energy efficiency and low carbon heat to homes, non-domestic energy sector requires efficiency, low carbon heat, and the consideration of space needs, how the portfolio changes. Transport relies heavily on electrification. Procurement needs better information, and it's a real challenge. And there's, of course, a special focus on construction. F-gas and waste are minor, but we need to watch for rising F-gas emissions when we put lots of heat pumps in. Extensive PV looks to offset about 6% of residual emissions as modelled. Of course, the benefits eroded by the decarbonisation of the grid. Afforestation would need a lot of tree planting to offset 6.5% of residual emissions, and offsetting the remaining 11,000 tonnes in terms of woodland certificates would cost about £150,000 per annum at current offset prices, and offset prices from when we researched this have gone up very considerably. And that's a quick summary of the report, perhaps not quick enough, but anyway.
Thank you for that, Tony, and thank you for the work that your team, Joe and the team, has done on that. And I know there's a lot of assumptions in there. And so we have the report before us and the recommendations, more importantly. Do I have any contributions? Councillor Moore.
Thank you very much. May I ask a question? Okay. So, would it be right to say that we shouldn't rely on decarbonisation of the grid as the solution to everything, particularly because the grid is not expected to decarbonise by 2035, if I've got that right? And secondly, how frequently do you think it's helpful for the council to have this sort of report updated so that we can assess progress, particularly because in the beginning you talk about aggressive measures to assess our progress. So if we just measure it again in 2030, probably a bit late. Thank you.
Thank you. Hang on, Tony, I'll come, otherwise we'll be flip-flopping all over the place here. Councillor Jobson.
No questions. I would just like to say thanks very much for a very detailed summary report, which has helped make the report a little bit more understandable. So thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you for that. Rest of the councillors, you're coming at the end, Councillor Wood. Any other councillors wish to make a contribution? No, then I will come to you now, Councillor Wood, and I'll get Tony to come back on a couple of those points.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, would like to thank the team for all the work they've done to date, actually, before we declared 2019. In 2019, the target to achieve net zero by 2030. The council has done some amazing work and had already gone on the journey, started on the journey to build the country's first passive house leisure centre. So we're already committed to this before we made the declaration. Making the declaration has set us a huge challenge, and it's faced by a lot of our partners, like many of us, who are also aiming for 2030. It's a big challenge. On the charts, when they came up with the coloured quadrants, I think it's important to note that the leisure service had quite a big slice out of that. But it's important to note that that included pyramids, and now we have SSP replacing pyramids. I think the share of orange we've got a bit smaller now. So just thought I'd mention that for my colleagues across the table. Also around scope 3, which is the procurement element, we have the Green Accord, which looks at setting standards to suppliers around checking how green their product is, if you like, how green their company is. And I think improvements in procurement as well will mean that, as was said, the price of procurement alone won't be a proper measure. An example of that would be the extensive use of wood as a construction material in St Sidwell's. High price, but in terms of carbon footprint for that price, the ratio is very much different to cement, shall we say. So yeah, it is horses for courses there. And just going back to the recommendations, I think it really is important that we do acknowledge the scale of this challenge, and that to achieve it is going to require some significant changes in how we operate as a council. But we're not alone in that challenge. So yeah. Yeah, I think the other point to raise is the 2.5, where members are recommended that net zero team research options for achieving net zero in use of carbon offsetting. And when we saw those tables, there was always a little bit to be done at the end. And the important thing to remember about that is that carbon offsetting comes in many forms. If you catch a plane sometime, you'll be offered a price to offset your carbon. How sure are we of the quality of that offsetting? Is it something we want to invest in? So in investigating the best offsetting, getting the best value for money, that is really important. And to remember as well that offsetting at 2030 is not the end of it. If we don't close that gap, close that loop to reach net zero, we will be offsetting every year. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Tony, although I can't see it anywhere in the report as such, if you could just briefly say, I don't want to have a big debate about whether or not we should or shouldn't rely on decarbonisation, but if you could just answer that very quickly for us, please.
Clearly, electricity users benefit from decarbonisation of the national grid. However, emissions come from lots of other sources, and clearly our heat in buildings is not electricity. It's currently gas. So decarbonisation of buildings needs to eliminate natural gas from our systems, and that in the short run is the major challenge. Yes, it assumes that our electricity is going to become increasingly renewable, and the Climate Change Committee are projecting that we essentially will have near zero carbon heat in the 2030s. So electricity is a route towards low carbon, but the national grid will need to follow the CCC's projections.
Thank you, Tony. And with regard to the frequency of the reports, that will be a matter that we'll need to decide on whether or not how frequent we want them, when we want them, and how we want them, and whether they go to scrutiny or whatever, that will be decided. So thank you very much, Tony and Joe, for the work you've done on that, and we'll continue to do, no doubt. So we've got the recommendations in front of us there. I'm going to move them from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour of the recommendations, please show.
That's unanimous vote, Chair. The recommendations have been carried.
Thank you very much indeed. And so now we'll go back to, let me get the folder there, item 8, which is the Local Household Support Fund Scheme. And again, hang on. Yeah, again, we've got a long, detailed recommendation there, which I do not require you to read, but just to very briefly, Tracy, and summarise it, and then I'll come to Bindu.
Thank you, Chair. The
And
Executive
Chris.
agrees and recommends to Council that the proposed Local Household Support Fund Scheme 3 is adopted. The proposed scheme being that the majority of the funding allocation of £337,853 is targeted as one-off grants to households receiving council tax support with one or more of the following priority characteristics, which are in the table below.
Thank you. Bindu, do you want Chris? Chris, if you can just briefly take us through the main points of the report you want to draw to our attention, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this report contains a recommended scheme for the third Household Support Fund scheme. We've run 2 schemes already over the last 12 months, and this scheme takes us through to the end of March 2023. Each of the 3 schemes has come with a different set of guidance and instruction from Department of Work and Pensions, and we are delivering the support on behalf of a partnership through Devon County Council. So we also have a framework agreement with Devon County Council on how those funds are going to be spent. This report contains our recommendations for the policy for spending those funds in Exeter. The Household Support Fund is targeting extra help at households that need the most support with the increased cost of living to do with heat, primarily energy and food and fuel costs. The local part of the Devon County Council Household Support Fund scheme encourages districts to use their local data to establish who are the households that are most in need of the extra help. And we looked at several options, several different ways of targeting that support, and our best source of data to establish low-income household need was through the council tax support data. So all the means tested support that we provide to our residents who are liable for council tax in the city. So it's a pretty good measure of low-income households in the city. So using that data, we used for the second Household Support Fund to target a couple of groups in quite a blunt way. What we've tried to do this time is to combine the pure household information that we've got through the council tax support data with data on where the arrears are sitting in the council tax collection system. So households that have a particular characteristic, whether that be single parents or large families, pensioners, disabled households, and so on, and looking at how the arrears levels for those groups compare. So the proposal that's in front of you is to target the support of those groups, those characteristics where we identified a higher than normal level of council tax arrears as an indication that those households may be struggling more than the general low-income households. There isn't enough money in the budget to allow us to support everybody, and there isn't enough even to make a meaningful contribution to everybody who receives council tax support from us. So what we've tried to do is balance between helping the most households that we can, those that look like they're most in need, and still provide a meaningful amount of support to those households, and to be able to obviously deploy those funds quickly, because they all have to be spent by the end of March next year. So coming up with anything too complicated or that's too resource intensive won't allow us to get the money out of the door in time. And this feels like a good balance between helping as many people as we can and giving a decent amount of support, and using our data, our local level data, to come up with a scheme that actually means something for Exeter residents and isn't just generalised across the country.
Thank you, Chris. Do I have any contributions or questions? Councillor Moore.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask a question about the cash voucher at the post office? If someone's unable to get that, for example, a carer, is there an alternative means of payment? And obviously you've explained that you can't support everybody, but if there are particular groups or particular people, for example, single parents or care leavers who might need additional support, would they be able to access this in terms of the small amount of money which is unallocated? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I have some further questions, please, or contributions? Councillor Morris.
Mine wasn't going to be a question, it was more a reflection on the fact that a few of us have held this portfolio at some point in the past, and that, first of all, Chris is amazing at his job, as are his team, but how often things like this drop out of the air, and that it's lovely that the government give us money, I'm not complaining, but we have to produce schemes, the staff have to work on that whilst doing their day jobs. So I think I'm probably preempting what Barbara would say in a minute, but just say thank you to everybody in that team, because when I was in the portfolio during COVID, every other week we were asking you to write another scheme for us. It's obviously happening with the cost of living crisis as well at the moment, and just a big sort of thank you to you and your team, because you are stars, and obviously I support the recommendation.
Anybody else would like to make a contribution or question? Councillor Wright.
Thank you. I've just got a question. Please could you explain what non-dependent deduction is?
Deal with that in a moment. Thank you. Councillor, who is it? Wood? Councillor Wood?
Thank you. I think my contribution was in the similar vein to Councillor Morse, that these things arrive on staff desks, sort out this, distribute this money, and just looking at the scheme, lots of different elements have been considered for their impact versus their effectiveness. It's a lot of thought has gone into this to maximise the impact for those most in need, to make the biggest difference we can. So yes, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Can somebody point me to where we say in the report about those vouchers, how they'll be dealt with? I'm desperately trying to look for it. Can you just show me?
Page 1.
Page 1.
Page 41.
Page 1, thank you.
Section 2, last paragraph.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Really need the right glasses with me. These are the ones I've got at the moment. Okay, so there's 2 points there, one from Councillor Wright and also from Councillor Moore. If I can have some brief answers to those.
Thank you. So in regards to the post office voucher redemption, yes, they are able to be redeemed by somebody on behalf of the person if they're not able to make it to the post office themselves. All they need is a piece of identification, which if they're providing care. The post office have proved quite flexible. We use them to disperse 4,500 vouchers during HSF2, and we found that to be quite.
Chris, can you look this way?
Beg pardon. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, so we've successfully used those vouchers in the past, and we expect that will be a just as effective for this scheme. In terms of single parents and others in need who might need extra help, we have deliberately avoided making this an open application scheme. There's a lot of complication that has to go into that in terms of setting up application forms and processes, and then the staff resources in terms of assessing those applications. So there wouldn't be an open application as such, but this is just one small part of the household support fund that's being delivered across Devon. So there are other groups that are being supported by schemes. I think Devon County receive about £5 million for the household support fund overall, and there are schemes that run across the county as well as these local district schemes that they may be able to access through, for example, children's services, family help.
Thank you.
Question about non-dependent deductions. Didn't miss that one. So non-dependent deduction is a concept within the means tested benefits, housing benefit and council tax support for normally adult relatives who live within the house. So if you've got mum and dad who are liable for the council tax and who claim the council tax support, if they have a child in the household, that child will essentially entitle them to more benefit. But at the point that child becomes an adult and gets a job, they then reduce the amount of benefit that household can receive. So they're not dependent, but they're not liable for the charge. And we see very high levels of arrears in households where there is a non-dependent in work.
Thank you, Chris. Yes,
Yeah.
come on in, Councillor Denning.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for their contributions. Okay, as it says in paragraph 3.1, you know, there is insufficient budget to be able to help everybody. But what Laura Fricker and Chris Brackman have done is really researched and really looked into it and ensured that as many people as possible over a wide range is going to be helped. Some of them that haven't been helped before because of using the council tax way. I want to thank them very much on behalf of the portfolio, and I know Bindu as well feels the same. They worked very hard on this, as you know, Councillor Ritter said, it gets put on their desk and they work hard. In regard to the post office vouchers, can I say I've known quite a few people who will and have actually received these, and there's never been a problem at all, you know, in the local post offices. I just think that it's wonderful that it's been sort of brought out the bag so quickly, and yet again, I think Exeter City Council has proved that it can deliver to the residents of Exeter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dunning. So there we have the recommendations in front of us. I'll move them from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour of the recommendations, please show.
Unanimous vote, Chair. The recommendations have been carried.
Thank you very much. We now move on to item 9, Mary Arches Street car park. And you see the recommendations here, and there are up to 14 of them, all detailed. And I'd like to keep to those if at all possible. Those are there. So, Director of Finance, Dave. You understand what I mean by brief, don't you?
Thank you, Chair. I do understand. So this is a report seeking authority from Council and the Executive to address Mary Arches car park, and to option the site to Exeter City Living, close the car park, secure vacant possession for a few commercial tenants that are part of the lower part of the car park, and then seek to demolish the car park using funding from central government for demolition and a range of other pieces to enable the land to come forward for a residential mixed-use development. I would just like to draw members' attention to 2 or 3 key points. Firstly, Mary Arches is a multi-storey car park which is not in great condition. Keeping the car park will cost, at current prices, £3.8 million to refurbish to a reasonable standard. Therefore, this is a car park that requires significant investment at a time where interest rates are rising and our capital programme is likely to be reduced. So in terms of not proceeding with this, it's not just the potential to lose funding from the government to help bring the site forward. It also will leave council with a kind of challenging decision on committing to further expenditure and significant expenditure in terms of the car park. In terms of the commercial tenants within the boundary of the red line, they have secure tenancies, which complicates matters, and therefore there is a recommendation to seek to move for a compulsory purchase order if negotiation is unsuccessful with those tenants. I need to make it clear to councillors, if there is a compulsory purchase order, there will be a requirement for a budget to provide particularly specialist legal support for the council to address that. And therefore, if that is the case, there will be a further report required to council to seek to agree a budget. That budget would likely be funded from the surplus from the Guildhall income, or be sought to be funded from the Guildhall surplus, which is there to address issues of regeneration, which of course this will be. In terms of the final recommendation I want to draw attention to is that there's a delegation to myself in consultation with you, Leader, to agree the final disposal within that red line. So the recommendation is that you limit what we can do to that red line. The final size of the disposal will be as part of the negotiations with Exeter City Living. Most interestingly, the surface car park has some significant challenges in that we know there's significant archaeological interest underneath the car park, and therefore it is highly unlikely that that would be disposed of for residential use because there would be a substantial amount of work that would need to be undertaken prior to that. So there may be some negotiation around the red line. It's included within the red line because there may be alternative uses that are more appropriate that you may wish to consider that would not cause as much challenge. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, David. So I'm looking for any questions or contributions. Councillor Jobson first.
Thank you. Can I ask, was the funding provided by government specifically for demolition? And has it been granted, or is it pending approval?
Right. Anything else?
Yeah. Do you want me to go through all
Yes,
of them?
please.
Thank you. The two really are on the nature of the residential development. It's not altogether clear reading through the form. It's not clear to me, might be to others, whether this is going to be for social affordable housing or whether there's going to be properties for sale on site, and if it's for sale, whether that's going to be affordable in like home assistance for homes to buy scheme. Can we be clear that no co-living or student buildings will be on that site, that there will be homes for families? Finally, looking at the timetable you've set out in paragraph 8.5, I'm just wondering why it's going to close so soon. Is that because there is work that absolutely has to be done, or could it not remain open for a little longer so that we can generate some income, because it's going to be closed for a very long period of time before it generates any income? And so I just wondered, when you're not planning on demolition until November next year and then transfer in January 24, why it couldn't remain open perhaps until the end of the school summer holidays?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jobson. Councillor Moore.
Thank you very much. I submitted my questions in advance so that we can hopefully receive a full answer, and thank you for that in advance. I would agree that in principle there is a compelling case to redevelop this site, and I'd add especially if they are decent and affordable homes. So my questions are: will the compulsory purchase order potentially include residential properties adjacent to the Mecca building, so they're not shown in the boundary but would be completely surrounded by the development. So, could they actually be included if they felt that was appropriate, because they might be orphaned from the rest of the area? My second question is, so there's actually 2 residential properties next to the Mecca building, and can it be confirmed that access to or rights of way to these properties will not be compromised or lost due to the disposal of the asset, any CPO, or during its redevelopment? The third question is, when does the grant require the funds to be spent by? The fourth question is, the timetable in the report shows it occurring, the demolition occurring 3 months after the planning application has been submitted and before the land transfer. Can the council guarantee that car park won't be demolished when and until the new scheme is ready to proceed? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll open this up for discussion and debate. Do I have anybody else wanting to come into this contribute? Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. Not wanting to from my own portfolio, not wanting to miss the opportunity to highlight that this will represent a reduction in parking in the city centre, which is, as we all know, trying to drive up and encourage sustainable travel. And one of the ways to do that is to make parking in the city centre less convenient. So I don't want to miss that one. The other one is in 8.1. The solar array is mentioned, and that was one of the first car park canopy arrays in the country. It's paid for itself since it was fitted and is now free for us to relocate, and it will be relocated. There'll be an options appraisal to look at the most appropriate and effective location for it before they come back online and continue to generate sustainable energy for the city. So just wanted to highlight those 2 items. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have we got anybody else want to come in on this discussion? So I'm going to ask David to answer a few questions. However, there's some political questions here, which is not appropriate for an officer to make. I can be clear, if it is the city council land, there will be no purpose-built student accommodation. And homes for families and amenity space, that's all a matter that will come forward in the planning application, of which we've got a consultation charter, and we will fully consult with everybody else. I have excluded co-living from that. I just don't know at the moment. I'm not going to give it. We have made no commitment with regard to co-living or whatever co-living looks like coming forward. We are in the Exeter plan and we'll deal with it there. So I think that was all with regard to that. About affordable, so you asked about affordable housing and sale receipts for all of that. Look, that'll all be dealt with when the applications come forward and how we deal with it. So we cannot micromanage what the planning application is going to look like at this stage. We haven't gone out for consultation. I haven't even seen what it looks like. So I don't know whether it's going to be red doors, green doors, brown doors. That'll all come forward in due course. With the brownfield release, that was the 1st of June of last year, 2021. The application was made and the agreement was dated on the 6th of September. What you didn't ask, and I'll tell you how much, it was 1.3 million. Okay, and that's made up with a number of other issues. So I'll leave Dave to deal with why about the car park, why it's so soon. And then there are some stuff in relation to residential properties, can that be confirmed right of access? Again, all those legal questions will be dealt with or realigned as part of the process. So about the planning application. So Dave, if you can come back with some of those other responses, please. And what I'll do to those, because they were in writing, give us a day or two, we'll respond in writing and everybody else will get a copy of it. But give us a time for that. And thanks for advance warning on all of that. So am I.
Thank you,
David.
Leader. And I'd also like to thank you both for putting the questions in advance. It does really help. So in terms of your first question about, was it specifically for demolition? The 1.3 million that Councillor Barrett referred to, 635,000 was for demolition and asbestos removal, 600,000 for piling, and £75,000 for a substation. So in terms of the homes, that the option is to Exeter City Living. So I would suggest that members perhaps remind themselves of Exeter City Living's business plan for that was approved in February this year, which will set out a broad intention for the site. In terms of co-living, that was responded to by the leader. But as I just suggested, the business plan for Exeter City Living does suggest what they're envisaging, which is part affordable to be managed by the HRA and open market rent, not sales, for the rest of the site. The car park, I can't see in the report that a specific date for the closure is mentioned. It says that we're seeking approval in December 2022 for closure, but that's not necessarily the date that it will close. In terms of closure, that will very much depend on one of two things. Firstly, the agreement moving forward and the timetable being finalised for when we require the site to be closed. Secondly, and probably the competing issue, will be the safety of the car park, and of course that's continually monitored, and if at any point the car park is deemed unsafe, then it would have to close. Otherwise we'd have to invest significant amounts to keep it open. But that will come forward as part of the negotiations and the timetable that's involved. In terms of the Councillor Moore's questions, the compulsory purchase orders is not intended at this moment in time to include properties outside of that indicative red line. And as I suggested, there is a challenge around the surface car park, which I believe from memory is the area that may cut off those residential properties, which mean it's likely to have a different use within that area than perhaps a built-up property, which may put some concerns to rest. That any such legal access to or rights of way to those properties will be protected or realigned as part of the process of developing that site. The grant requires the funds to be spent by requires land transfer by the 31st of March 2024. In terms of whether the council can guarantee the car park won't be demolished, we can't guarantee that, but there are wider considerations here, as I mentioned, around the capital investment required to keep the car park in its current condition. It's likely, if there is a gap, that the council will seek an alternative use in the period of that gap for the land. I think that answers all.
Okay, I think that is it as well, David. Thank you for that. So just to conclude on that, there is a consultation process. We will be consulting. A lot more of these other questions can be asked at the appropriate time and answers will be given. So I'm going to move the recommendations from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour of the recommendations, please show.
That's unanimous. Vote, Chair. Recommendations have been carried.
Thank you. We are now going to move to Item 17 is the community infrastructure levy partial review, and you will see there are four items for recommendation here. So they'll become apparent. And who's actually coming on this one? So Ian Collison, followed by George. Ian. George, please just talk us through the proposals, please, or the paper.
Thank you, Chair. I will attempt to be brief. So the report seeks approval to consult on revision to the draft SIL charging schedule, which sets out SIL rates, or a set of proposed SIL rates to apply in the city. The City Council implemented SIL in 2013. Since then, there have been a number of changes to the development picture. New development types have emerged. We've had different development types maturing. Viability has changed for development, and we also have an emerging new development strategy. And so, on this basis, a review of some of the council's SIL charges is required. This has already been approved by council back in 2019. And so over the last period of time, we've engaged consultants to look at the viability of a series of revised charges, and these are proposed and set out in an update to the charging schedule, which is proposed for consultation. Not all of the rates that we currently charge are being proposed for revision, but a few key ones to note. So the proposals are to increase the charges on purpose-built student accommodation, to introduce a SIL rate for co-living development, set out a specific charge for build-to-rent residential development to bring it out of the standard residential charges, and to do similar with flatted developments to effectively remove a SIL rate for flats due to their viability challenges. The standard residential rate is currently charged, and the same for city centre, or rather out of city centre retail rates are not proposed to change. I won't go through all the recommendations beyond to say that there are four recommendations related to approving consultation with a view to then submitting the draft charging schedule for examination next year. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, George. Do I have any contributions from the floor? Councillor Jobson.
Thank you. It's just a bit of mystification, really. Why isn't co-living being charged at the same rate as PBSA? They're almost identical types of dwelling and identical types of square footage per unit.
Thank you. Councillor Moore wanted to come in. Councillor Moore.
Thank you very much. As you yourself, Leader, just said, we're not clear what co-living looks like, and all the schemes to date have been brought forward as build-to-rent schemes on that basis. So I'm wondering why it's a separate category. I also have a concern that the other issues that would be accommodated within a full review haven't been covered, and that it falls well short of the brief that went out for procurement, such as lower levy rates for high environmental standards in construction to mitigate the cost of increased construction charges. So I have a couple of questions. At the July 2019 executive and the subsequent council, there was an allocation of a budget of up to 75,000 in order to instruct consultants to review the community infrastructure levy charging schedule, and this was approved. So how much of that has been spent on this contract for a partial review? Secondly, The council agreed a full review of the SIL, not a partial review. There was nothing mentioned in any of the reports about partial reviews, and it was tendered on that basis of a full review. So who subsequently decided that this should be a partial review? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I echo the points that have been made by two other opposition leaders. Just a point of clarification, if I may, because I welcome the increase in the purpose-built student accommodation levy. However, in the past, as people will know, we have an Article 4 direction area within the city, and that was put in place due to over-concentration within those streets and residential areas. Purpose-built student accommodation within those areas just adds to that feeling of concentration. So was at any stage during this process it looked at in terms of maybe zoning the city with different charges for different areas? Because in my view it makes sense if there is a different charge within areas that have concentration to those that don't. And if that was looked at, why isn't it in this report? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to take time to recognise that the SIL, the rate of SIL, is what we can use and do use to shape the development within the city. It helps to influence the market. And I can clearly see that these rates respond to the views we've heard about purpose-built student accommodation, and also about the opportunities for local residents in co-living. So it makes sense to me, the rates that are on those tables. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Do I have any other? Councillor Morse.
I think next year is the year of consultation as far as planning is concerned. We've got a very busy year coming up, and we're in the middle of the consultation at the moment. So it should probably be noted from the report that there will be a consultation on the SIL review, and that feedback will be appreciated from that, and that we'll be following our usual processes for that. I think it's called a technical consultation, but it is a consultation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Morse. Anybody else want to make a contribution? Well, just to very quickly, in relation to build around and about the construction and everything else like that, and I suppose it goes the same for some of the others. The clue is published for consultation, which actually means people can respond and make consultations, and then it comes back to us, and then it will, once following the consultation comes back, we will have an updated draft brought to the executive in advance of the submission, and I assume that will go to council. So there's lots of mechanisms for a number of points on how much, too much, not enough, zoning or whatever, for people to make contributions to it. This is not part of the consultation process. We're just dealing with the recommendations as set before us. With regard to, which is a valid question in my view, the budget of 75,000, we've spent £30,175. With regard to co-living not being charged the same as the PPSA, but you need to make that contribution. You need to, there's been a lot of technical advice. It's not a market whereby we're all up back by 20 quid. What do you want? It wasn't a market insofar as, well, I certainly hope, George and Ian, it's not based on sat round the coffee table having to think of what number to pick and put on that. You've actually got a number of reasons that you have to do it. However, what's going to be more important is putting it out for consultation. And this doesn't touch the Article 4 in my view. However, all those observations about zoning should be made in the appropriate place, and then it will come back, and then there will be a debate about all of the observations coming in at that time. Personally, I think many of us have got other things to say about it, and we will use the mechanisms to say that, and then it will come back to us and we'll have those things. But I will get back to you. As for the partial review or whatever, I think George said it was agreed at the executive in 2019, and that decision did not stipulate the detailed breadth of the review. And however, do we want a review? Yes, we do. Do we want it done within a sensible time frame? Of course we do. And the partial review will get there. And then if we need to do something others, it is a partial review refers to the proposed revision of the selection of the SIL rates as opposed to all of them. So we'll go through it step by step. The team will deal with it. It will go out to consultation. The paper will come back once the public and those people have responded. Oh, by the way, I feel sure developers will be responding to this one as well. They'll have quite a lot to say about it, I feel sure. And so we have to take it all in, and then it has to be, as it says, submission for examination. So if we got it wrong, there'll be somebody putting us right. So you've got the 4 recommendations there in front of you, everybody. All those in, I'll move the recommendations from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour?
That's a unanimous vote, Chair. The recommendations have been carried.
Okay, thank you. And now we move on to item 18, which is the infrastructure funding, annual infrastructure funding statement. And here there's one recommendation that we note the contents of the 2022 statement. Is this, I think it's Ian and George again. Is it George? George.
Yeah, this one's me again, Chair. Again, I will be brief. So the report presents the annual infrastructure funding statement and recommends that it's noted. We have a statutory responsibility, like all councils, to prepare an annual infrastructure funding statement. And these statements have to present prescribed information as set out in the SIL regulations. The statement is broadly divided into 3. There's a section covering SIL receipts, how that has been spent in the last year. A similar section related to section 106, and then at the end there's an infrastructure list which provides an indication, albeit without commitment, of how the council could decide to spend SIL receipts over the coming period of time. So broadly, we have a series of figures that are presented in a series of tables, and then an infrastructure list at the end of the document. To draw your attention and members' attention to a small number of changes to the infrastructure list. This has, as I said, broadly has changed, has remained unchanged since last year's statement, but there are a couple of additions. One being a specific mention of community facilities and the potential to spend SIL on facilities such as Pinnow Community Hub. A reference to strategic cemetery provision, because we have capacity issues emerging in the cemeteries within the city, and then improvements to sports provision at King George V playing field.
Councillor Wood was going to declare an interest on 19. You've mentioned it in number 18, so that's why he's hopping out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think I was nearly done. So I think that was it. I was attempting to be extremely brief. So there was those 3 changes to the infrastructure list to draw your attention to. Otherwise, those projects remained unchanged. I think it's also worth drawing the attention to the fact that the list doesn't provide a commitment to funding specific projects or an amount of funding, but it provides a direction of travel to inform future discussions around such funding arrangements, which would be made through the regular channels.
Thank you, George, and don't worry about that. That's just Councillor Wood making sure that nothing can be, he's not influencing anything at all. So thank you for that. Have I got any contributions from the Councillor?
Thank you very much. One of the areas which is identified in infrastructure requirements is the quay and area and water lane area, and there is, as you know, a real concern about the removal of Mallison Bridge and the council's commitment to reinstate that, because it is an important piece of infrastructure for walking and cycling, not just in the very small area, but a broader area. So I would wish to see that in the future, this future list. I also feel, having heard the presentation earlier, that it's really important that the carbon emissions for these future activities are calculated for these projects, because we're going to be creating more carbon as a result of this infrastructure, and it's reviewed in terms of, there's a lot of stuff in here which is good around walking and cycling, but we reduce under commitments to road building.
Okay. Anybody else would like to make a contribution? Of course, Councillor Mitchell.
Well, thank you, Leader. Can I just ask for a bit of clarification, if I may? It's on something that, strangely enough, is not in the report, which might seem a bit strange, but obviously we have a neighbourhood plan within this city, within St James Neighbourhood Plan. And there are references to various regulations in this document. And it's my understanding that Regulation 59A subsection 3 states that in England, where all or part of a chargeable development is within an area that has a neighbourhood development plan in place, the charging authority must pass 25% of the relevant seal receipts to the parish council for that area. Now, surely, because we don't have parish councils in the city, we're not going to deny a neighbourhood plan area under funding that is arguably due to it under the regulations. So can I just please have clarification?
Okay, thank you very much. Do I have any other contributions on this? No? On that 59A little 3, there are parochial church parishes still within Exeter, quite a number actually. However, there are no parish councils in the terms of local government, and it was my clear understanding that there was an understanding that how the money would be spent. But what I intend to do is to talk to the relevant people about to see if that has any weight, that plan, the neighbourhood plan, have any weight on it at all. Just to say, we have avoided going down that what's mine's mine and what's yours and what's that, because we would have places which would have nothing. That's not what we've done. And you will quite rightly point me to the fact the amount of sill taken in the area, in your view. Hold that thought until the next item, Councillor Mitchell. So, if we can say you've also made some references there, Councillor, more in relation to what your view is of Mallison Bridge, and I do understand it, by the way. That again is something that you can make a recommendation or move at a council meeting and bring to us at a later stage. But that is the statement that is going forward at the time from this executive. So you have a right to put what you believe should be in there. So I'll move the recommendation from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour?
Unanimous vote, Chair. The recommendations have been carried.
Thank you. You will record that.
I have recorded it, yes.
And also that Councillor Wood wishes to declare an interest with regard to item 19. So here we are, item 19. We've got 3 recommendations here of up to 1.222 of seal money and section 106 to funding towards the development of Pinhole Hub. You've seen the paper. We have had this to us before in one form or another. So those are the recommendations. I'm going to JP, if you would like to speak to this one for us, please.
Chair, so the members are being asked to support the funding outlined in the paper. As you say, the council has previously supported the Pinhole Community Hub trustees, and that was the funding towards a high feasibility study. The outcome of that feasibility study is the production of the business case that you see before you today. I'd just like to draw members' attention to the fact that the council is looking to commit in principle funding here. It's subject to full investment, including all external funding for the programme being confirmed. The reason that we would want to do this is it will hopefully open the door for the trustees to apply for funding for the whole scheme in itself, and it provides a letter of comfort to them. Of course, the council would request formally in writing for the external funding in order for ECC's money to be released. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll open this up for discussion. Councillor Jobson.
I mean, with support the concept of the Pinho Hub, but I noted from the Charity Commission website that the trustees filed their accounts for December 21 late. Their income was only about 5,000 odd. The requirement is for them to raise £765,000 under this scheme. It seems unlikely that they're going to be able to do that without significant grant funding in time. And I just worry that people are anticipating that this lovely hub is going to be built and that it isn't, because the trustees won't be able to come up with that sort of money. I just wondered if there was any more information that could be divulged.
Okay, thank you. Any other contributions from the floor? Councillor Morse.
I was going to say that it's, as someone who lives in that area of the city, I live in Minster Lake, right on the edge of the Pinho border, and the view from my window has changed significantly over the last 10 years. And there's been not just a small amount of building in that area, but a ridiculous amount of in that area, and that some of the sill that has been generated, we definitely owe some kind of investment in Pinho, and I completely support this recommendation. I think it would be lovely for them to own something that looked like the buildings that we've seen in Hevertree and in Belmont, where we've got real community focus. And I would say, as somebody who was the county councillor for the area, the current library building is not really fit for purpose, and that's putting it mildly. And at one point I stood in a lot of poo, for a better description, when it flooded because the culvert broke right next to it. So I can't think of a more adequate way to spend SIL money in an area that has been put upon to such a degree and that it's changed in so many different ways. And I think we've got examples of it working across the city already. And also in the ilk of JC, Councillor Parkhouse would say the sort of Sylvania stores, the community start to run it. So I'm supporting this recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Any other member of the executive? No? Okay. Laura, yeah, sorry, I see you're all in black, you see.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on the question of, is this a risk and will trustees be able to get the money? That's not for us to decide. And they, as the director said, if we don't show willing and say we will give this money if you can get the other funding together, then they won't be able to actually try to get the other funding together. And it'd be a real shame for any community group to be told, no, you're too high risk. We're not going to support this. If we did that across the city with every idea, we wouldn't move, we wouldn't build anything, we wouldn't develop anything, we wouldn't enhance any community infrastructure or neighbourhoods whatsoever at all. So I just wanted to say that, yes, it's a risk, but isn't everything. And good luck to the community for doing it, and echo what Councillor Moore said.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. We've seen your report, and who's saying it's a risk? You know, you've agreed it with, and it won't come until the end. So,
sorry, the word I used was realistic. It wasn't risk.
Leader, as someone who's read the business plan and challenged the trustees, not because I don't want to see it happen, but because they're trustees of a charity, that puts certain legal responsibilities on them. What I would say, I have been reassured. Councillor Jobson's right that there is a risk, or is it realistic? there's a chance they will not deliver the additional funding. What I would say from having spoken to them is they have a credible plan and have identified a whole range of opportunities to apply for that funding. And this in principle agreement will help support them in those applications. I don't think it's ever possible to say they will definitely come off, but they have at least done the work to identify a range of options to deliver this.
Thank you, David. Yeah, the report is the report, and so those are the 3 recommendations which I move from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour of the recommendation, please show.
Unanimous vote, Chair. The recommendations have been carried.
Thank you. We're now back to, yeah, oh yes, please get him in. So we do have item 10. There's 5 recommendations here. David, it's the overview of the general fund revenue budget Q2.
Thank you, Chair. Back in more familiar territory for me with all the range of finance reports now. So this is the Q2 overview of the general fund budget. I will be brief because there's not a significant change. Positively, there have been 2 very positive variances identified during the second quarter. Firstly, car park income trajectory is now projecting much closer to budget, and net interest as a result of the rising interest rates. We're benefiting from those on our investment deposits. We haven't undertaken any further long-term or short-term borrowing, and therefore we're seeing a positive position on our interest, which I'll come on to a bit further in another report. While some of that interest is rightly paid across to the HRA, there's still a positive benefit to the general fund. In terms of the report, there's a number of supplementary budget requests. All of those are self-financing in that we've been given the income, or they are coming from an earmark reserve, so they have no impact on the general fund working balance. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Do I have any contributions? Councillor Jobson.
Thank you. It was really about the project for the leisure and sport, the 899,000. I wondered if that could be further broken down. Our figures being, well, figures clearly are being maintained as to how many new memberships there are on a month-by-month basis, or that, to see how that figure is going to be in the future. And on page 98, there is, trying to find it, about home call. Really, it's because it's been red flagged, which is a shame. Is there anything that can be done that to improve take up of that, or is it now becoming a more obsolete option, and are the cheaper options better? Not always the case. Is there anything more that can be done for home call, because it has been a useful service, but seems to be no.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jobson. Was there anybody else? Councillor Moore.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. I just had a question. It's just some. It's not quite clear in some of the aspects about which project, where there's been decisions to stop projects or not. So, for example, like the columbarium, which is sounding like it's not going to proceed, or particularly not in this way, because it's going to be funded by the SIL, I think, from the decision that's just been taken. So there's just, that would just be helpful to be clear about some of these things. So, and in that light, I'm concerned about the question on page 82. One of it, which I'm not really clear about what it says. It says one of the, because it talks about the 3 business cases. One of those was already begun as council received a report last December, so has no further work been undertaken with this. So will all the underspend be allocated to that particular business case, i.e. build to rent company? So what's happening to the other 2? And the other question I have is about the waste chargeable services. So what will be the financial impact of the disruptions to the service, particularly the brown bin collections, which have resulted in credits to customers? So will that be a loss of income next year? Thank you.
Okay, okay. Do I have any other further observations? Okay, can we, I get the question, Councillor Jobson, and it's a good answer actually. I'm not sure how relevant it is to this, but 12,102 members we have, which is 2,000 over and above we projected to have in 3 years' time. So if you are a member, thank you very much. If not, please see JP after the meeting. So that's that one. In relation to those issues of the columbarium, the 8.3 underspending the waste charges, if you could just briefly just answer those, because I'm trying not to turn this into a scrutiny meeting, you see. I want the answers to be given clearly and succinctly. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. So in terms of the columbarium, yes, it's unlikely that will proceed owing to significant challenges in the positioning of it. In terms of the business plans for Exeter City Living, Councillor Moore absolutely right. The first business plan was delivered and considered by Council. The plan is not to proceed with the other two. The plan is therefore not to continue to allocate that money, which is backed by an earmark reserve, and therefore that funding will be held until such time as either the business plans are decided to come forward again, or further work is required. Otherwise, that money could be returned to the general fund balance. In terms of waste chargeable services, there is absolutely likely to be an impact to income from credits that have been given in terms of the challenges with the brown bins. I can't say at this moment in time what the impact of that will be.
And the home call, Councillor Johnson mentioned.
So in terms of home call, we have a new service lead who's looking after home call and is going to undertake a review in order to look at how they can try and promote the service better to try and increase the income back. In terms of members should be comforted, it does generate a positive income. It just doesn't generate as positive an income as we anticipated or it used to.
Okay, thank you, David. And just to say, all services at this moment are being looked into. All services, which will come to all councillors in January. So yeah. So there's the recommendation on number 10. I'll move from the chair. Thank you. All those in favour?
It's unanimous vote, Chair. The recommendations have been carried.
So we have item 11, which is the General Fund Capital Monitoring Statement for the second quarter, and there are two recommendations here. David.
Thank you, Chair. So as you say, it's the quarter two capital monitoring statement. Just the key highlights: performance against budget. The budget stands at the start of the report at 95.55 million, of which we spent 49.5 million, cheating because 44 million of that was on one particular project. But it does relate to 51.8% of the revised programme, which I suspect is the highest percentage I've ever reported to you at the 6-month stage of a capital programme. And certainly compared to the 9% we spent at this stage last year. In terms of the report, there is a request for one further scheme, Countess Weir retaining wall, £150,000. which we're proposing to fund from an underspend in another scheme in respect of district lighting. That's not because we stopped doing the district lighting scheme, it's actually come in under budget. Again, something you probably haven't heard from me in respect of a capital scheme for a while. In terms of the overall programme, as members are aware, we're doing work to try and reduce and deprioritise some schemes to try and make the borrowing requirement more affordable given higher interest rates. That will come forward as part of the budget in February. You can see generally the challenges of delivering a capital programme already. The 95 million that we referred to at the start of the report has dropped to 79 million in terms of the deferrals that are being going to council for approval. So it's a challenging time in terms of capital programme, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Do I have any contributions from the floor? Councillor Jobson, you.
I did raise, I have reread the report. I don't need to ask that question.
Thank you. There you go. That's something interesting. Thank you. Any other observations, members? No, we've got the two recommendations in front of us. I'll move them from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please?
Second, Chair.
All those in favour?
That's unanimous vote, Chair. That has been carried.
Thank you. Item 12, which is the HRA monitoring report. We've got two recommendations there. Councillor Denning.
Okay, it is recommended the executive note report and council notes and approves for applicable one the HRA forecast financial position for 22-23 financial year and the revision of the HRA capital programme to reflect the reported variations detailed to Appendix 4.
Okay. Do I have any contributions from the floor on it? Well, first of all, David, I feel sure you want to tell us about this.
Yes, for the second quarter in a row, there's very little to say. Very small movement compared to the original budget as set. So I don't have a significant amount to add to the report as laid out. But I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Moore.
Thank you. Just want to look at the risk register on page 135 in regards to general maintenance, and there will be an overspend. Can the portfolio holder confirm that there won't be a hold up or stopping of any maintenance for council housing because the fund is short of money?
Okay, thank you. Can I have any more contributions from the floor, if at all? No, a couple of points there for you to quickly deal with, David.
Okay, so what I would say in terms of repairs and maintenance, there is an overspend in repairs and maintenance. There's quite a significant increase in net interest, as mentioned earlier, for the HRA. In terms of the way the HRA is managed, monies will be moved around to make sure, repairs and maintenance tend to happen to void properties. If we don't do the repairs and maintenance, we don't get the void properties back in. We don't get the income in. So it's absolutely not in the HRA's interest to skimp on that. Hence why the money's been identified as an overspend rather than cutting further spend to bring it back in budget.
Okay, thank you. Two recommendations there. I'll move from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Wright. All those in favour?
Unanimous vote, Chair. The recommendations have been carried.
Thank you. We now move on to agenda item number 13, Treasury Management half-yearly update. One recommendation that we members of Executive and Council note the report. Dave Hodgson.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a statutory report reporting our 6-monthly performance on Treasury Management, so that you can make sure we're managing our funds in line with the annual investment strategy that you set out. Just two things to highlight. As mentioned earlier, we're doing quite well in terms of interest through following a policy of not borrowing and therefore benefiting from increased interest rates on our investments. The not borrowing is as a result of extremely volatile interest rates, particularly in government gilts, which underpin the PWLB, which is where we borrow our money. We're now aiming at a target to not borrow long term until that rate falls below 3.5%, which at the moment is being projected by our advisors as around September 2024. So we'll manage internally, reduce our cash balances in order to not have to go out and long-term borrow. And that's all I really want to say. And
okay, David, that's fine with us. Do we have any contributions from the floor? Councillor Jobson.
It's really just to ask whether the investments to Thurrock Council and Standard Charters have been repaid. And noting the sharp increase in the PWLB loan rates is an assessment of likely future rates being factored into your considerations at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the thing? On those 2 points, Councillor Jobson, I'm going to save you the effort, Dave, is that Thurrock Council has been repaid in full. Standard Charters has been rolled over for a further 6 months. Noting the sharp increase in public works loan book, yes, we have noted it. Is there an assessment of likely return to future rates? If you know, let us know. I mean, in other words, I mean, I really think these are questions, but yeah, are they? I didn't know whether or not you'd want to ask them maybe at a scrutiny meeting to the portfolio holder and Dave when there's a bigger time to debate some of this stuff. But we can, I can talk about that to the leaders on how we take these things forward. So that is it. We get regular updates on the PMB rates. Who knows what they're going to be? Like several million people trying to have their remortgages at the moment. Who knows? So those are the recommendations. I'll move them from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour?
That's a unanimous vote, Chair. That has been carried.
Thank you. Item 14, and here this is the management provision of the council's temporary agency staff. Councillor Wright.
Thanks, Chair. The recommendations of the report are that the award of the contract is made to Commensurate via a neutral vendor arrangement for an initial period of 2 years with an option to extend for a possible 2 further 1-year extensions.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any contributions from the floor on this one? Anybody? No? Okay, those are the recommendations. I'll move them from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please?
Yes, sorry, I thought the officer was going to talk on it. Sorry. Yes, seconded. Of course.
Is there something in the report that we need to know that you need to draw attention? I didn't think there was, to be quite honest. Okay. Thank you. All those in favour, please show.
That is unanimous, Chair. The recommendations have been carried.
And now I move on to taxi. On to item 16, request for a variation of Hackney carriage fares. And you see the recommendations. Councillor Hussain would have been normally here to move these recommendations. I mean, Simon, come forward. Come to the front of the taxi queue. So we've got some recommendations here, broadly speaking, that we need to put forward for them. Item 16. Simon, if you'd like to talk us through the paper, please.
I won't use the microphone because it's on the link there, so I've got a loud enough voice. This is just bringing back, Chair,
the report following the consultation that this executive approved at the beginning of October. That has now closed, and as a result, we had 9 people or parties respond to that consultation process, which is before you in Appendix C. And therefore, we're bringing back the report for consideration for whether the executive will approve the proposals that were put forward as part of that consultation. There was nothing sort of in the consultation exercise that really merited a departure away from the proposals that were originally put.
Thank you, Simon. Do we have any contributions? No members of the executive? No? Okay.
I was just going to say that we do, and I'm critical quite a lot of the time, that we do support this. I think we should know.
Thank you, Councillor Jobson. No, I do feel, Simon, that the taxi situation is far better of late in Exeter. You know, and I think you're doing a good job in that, and so are the taxi drivers. So those are the recommendations. All those in favour, and seconder, please. Seconder. All those in favour?
That is unanimous, Chair. The recommendations have been carried.
Okay. And so now I move on to item 20, which is the live and move strategy and governance proposals. Councillor Parkhurst, if you can read your recommendations, please.
Yeah, so the recommendations that the revised governance structures and terms of reference are approved, that the council constitution is updated accordingly, and that the live and move strategy is noted. Delegated powers are granted to the director in consultation with portfolio holder.
Okay, thank you. James Bow, can you talk to the paper, please?
I'll talk to the paper briefly, just to say that this is on the back of extensive engagement and partnership work with Sport England over the last 9 months. It's a milestone moment where we've reframed our strategy for Live and Move to tackle inequalities across the city and to drive outcomes around physical and mental well-being. We've got 3 really clear strategy objectives around increased physical activity for well-being, increased walking and cycling, and where physical activity connects our local communities. We're holding really firm on targeting our resources at the wards and communities that need it most, work in Wamford, Beacon Heath, Exwick and other places. And we have a 2.5-year agreement for Sport England to deliver this programme of work, whilst we will also look to work with Sport England to identify further resources beyond that period. Hopefully you get the opportunity to read the strategy. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, James. Do I have any contributions at the moment? Councillor Wood.
Just a quick contribution, because this was until Councillor Parkhurst took over the portfolio from me. This used to be mine, and I think the Live and Move initiative is really useful. It helps those most in need, and it supports my current portfolio, which is about improving sustainable travel and travel options. And so, thank you.
You're too late, but I'll let it go. You must come in at the start, Councillor Moore. Go on, your contribution, please.
Thank you very much for this and for the work that you do, particularly it's great. I welcome in the report the commitment to engage further with councillors, and it would be really great to see an impact assessment report of progress that has been made. You've talked about very much targeting particular areas, but I'm very concerned about some areas of St David's which have high levels of deprivation. I would also just like to talk about the governance element, because we saw a governance review not so long ago. So if you could just explain sort of what's driven it to this point. I can see it's obviously to do with funding, but it would be really good if you could just explain that. And also with the sounding board, how do particularly voluntary and community organisations get to know about this and become involved? It says it's quite fluid, but being able to be involved in this process, which is quite complex in terms of governance, it would be helpful to know how they do that. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Councillor Parkhouse.
Thank you, Chair. So I welcome this report, and I just wanted to highlight the work that Live and Move do. Yesterday, Sunday, what day are we on? I was lucky enough to join the Inclusive Exeter session that they run in Wamford, which is a free badminton session for BME residents. So it's primarily Bangladeshi and Hong Kongese residents that live in the local community. It's a free session. They come along, they play some badminton, they meet other people. It's just a really fantastic initiative. And that's just one of the many things that Live and Move is doing to try and address these physical activity gaps. So in COVID, these gaps widened. We saw that residents of Asian descent have higher levels of inactivity, and as the report says, residents in our poorest communities are 3 times more likely to be inactive. So just bringing home on that really means it's not just about weight, it's about having more likely to have diabetes, cancer, early dementia, and to be morbid, early death. But and by contrast, being physically active doesn't just prevent you from unhealthy weight gain. It's also good for your mental health, reducing anxiety and depression, improving sleep, cognitive ability. It just goes on the list, and it can even add up to 7 years life expectancy. So to kind of bring this to our wider 2040 vision, that by the time they're an adult, a child born in Exeter today will live in an inclusive, healthy and sustainable city, and all citizens are able to participate fully in that social life. And for me, this is just the prime work of this portfolio, is giving people access to physical activity across the city and increasing that inclusivity. So I believe this report positions Live and Move and the council in a stronger place to meet the challenges that we've faced through COVID, the brave decision to bring Exeter Leisure back in-house, the fact that we're constantly having to respond to all the different changes of data, and the impact that we're increasingly seeing with the cost of living crisis, that people are finding there's financial barriers to accessing physical activity. So I want to conclude, because the irony is not lost on me, that through talking about physical activity, we're obviously missing watching England play physical activity on our TV. So, but yeah, I really thank officers for their time on this report, and yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Just a remark to say, I think it's not so much about activity but stress levels watching those teams. James, what's brought about the governance change? I'm assuming it's the reasons are in the recommendations. Are there any other reasons other than what are in the reasons for recommendations to bring that about? And secondly, which is quite important, how does a group or whoever get onto that sounding board or make their views heard?
Yeah, we've evolved the governance and wanted to strengthen kind of member involvement throughout all of the decisions that we take through the programme, through scrutiny and through executive and council. We have taken the opportunity to maintain our sounding board, but not in a decision-making role. Any resident can get involved in the programme. We work with over 20 local community and voluntary sector organisations through the programme who know their residents the most. And we also have a number of networks across the city, 5 in fact, where local residents can join and make decisions and drive great projects on the ground. So there's plenty of opportunity for residents to get involved.
Thank you for that, James. So I'll move the recommendations from the chair. Can I say all those in favour? Please show.
That is unanimous, Chair. That has been carried.
Thank you, Mark. So we'll move on to item 21, the Exeter Community Lottery, and there's 4 recommendations here. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to note really that this is an executive or council function at the top of this report. It says council, and that's like all the business that we've discussed tonight. So I'm going to keep my contribution short because the debates take place at council with all members. This is an executive where we recommend action to take forward. In light of that, those recommendations are that executive recommends and council approves the establishment of a local community lottery for Exeter. The director, in consultation with the portfolio holder communities, contract an external lottery manager to deliver the scheme on the council's behalf. That any proceeds be distributed with the existing Exeter grants programme, and the council join the Lotteries Council in order to deliver the lottery through the best practices and access free membership services on legal and compliance issues.
John Paul Hedge. You would like to?
Nothing further to add, Chair, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, can I have some contributions? Councillor Moore.
Thank you very much. So this is a very interesting idea, and as someone who's worked in the voluntary sector and had quite a lot for her salary paid for by the National Lottery over many years, it's quite an interesting idea. But in terms of any report that's going to council, I think there's a number of questions that need to be clarified before it's presented. Can the portfolio holder explain what consultation has been undertaken with the voluntary sector before this proposal came here? And this proposal was part of the scrutiny committee, which met recently, and it was part of the commercial programme for the council. So how much money is expected to be raised from this activity to contribute to the council? And the third area for clarification is the EQIA doesn't acknowledge the role of faith groups and the important role that they play in our community life. And I'm just wanting to know how the fund will benefit them, particularly because Muslim, Methodist or Quaker groups wouldn't take money from a lottery.
Okay, can I have some other contributions? Councillor Johnson.
It was only really very short one. I do think I have an unease about it at this particular time. And I do think that when the report comes to council, that the safety measures ought to be really highlighted in more detail than they are at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Jobson. Anybody else want to make a contribution? Councillor Wood.
Just really quickly to agree with Councillor Pearce that this will be fully discussed at council, but we have gone through this a few times, and I'm completely comfortable with the safety elements to it, and that it is a professionally run lottery, and it's done by many other councils, and our community and voluntary sector will be the main beneficiaries of it. So I think it's a great scheme.
Thank you. Anybody else? So before I come to you, JP, there's a couple there to explain the consultation, the issue with handing out money, about faith groups who don't believe in gambling, and about the distribution of the money. But before I do that, Councillor Pearce.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to say, I'm quite happy to share with Councillor Moore and Councillor Jobson and Mitchell, if they're interested, some of the research that was done before bringing this paper forward, and possibly help inform the debate when we go to the appropriate forum for that debate at full council in a couple of weeks' time. I think this is a great opportunity. It's something that's really exciting. It's not been done before here in the city. It's something bit disappointingly that we're not trailblazing on like we do on so much other stuff. There's 333 local authorities in England, and we'll probably be the 115th if council approves this. I hope that council will see the wisdom in this and will approve it, because it really gives a sustainable method of funding for community groups who are really, really valuable and contribute massively to our community and city here. And it will sit in addition to the funding that they already receive. There's lots of really small organisations within the city who would love to be able to have fundraising teams, or go out there in search of legacies and things like some of the big organised charitable groups do, but they just can't manage it. And this is an opportunity for them to reach out to their supporters and give them a mechanism for donating directly. This is, incentivized giving rather than gambling in a lottery. But the proposal that I'm willing to share with you all, opposition leaders there, go through that really clearly.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Pearce. John Paul Edge.
Thank you, Chair. Exeter isn't a pioneer on this occasion. There are over 100 other councils that have gone before us on this and run incredibly successful lotteries around the country. So we're just simply following in their footsteps in there. I believe it was pursued through the commercial paper. However, this plan itself hasn't materialised out of that particular body of work. The paper is as the paper is presented and will remain so for councils. Those debates should focus on how the paper is presented now, and it's kindly noted around Muslim Methodist and Quaker groups. We absolutely work with those communities at the moment. We fund them through our existing grants programme. This is additional funding on top of that, and we'll continue to work with those groups. There will be those in society that don't wish to access this additional funding.
Thank you. So those are the recommendations before us. Can I have I'll move from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? All those in favour, please show.
That is universal, Chair. The recommendations have been carried.
Thank you. Universal must be easy. must be easier to easier to spell than unanimous. Right. Okay. Yeah. Come on. Let's smile, everybody. Come on. We could be 4-0 down now. And there's a smile on his face. So we now come on to item 22. This is the report, major capital projects, budgets, Edwards Court and Exeter Bus Station and Sybil Street. Now, we will go into part 2 in a minute. Be very careful because we're still in public. If you drift into that, try to contain yourself if you can. We will come into that in a moment. These are the recommendations. But in relation to I suppose I'm allowed to ask myself a question, aren't I, at the start? And that question would be, how many awards? That's a simple point. 1. Well, I haven't got time to tell you of all the ones we've been listed for and just come in. But Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors Grand Final Awards, winner of the Environmental Impact Award, Chartered Institute of Building Awards, Team of the Year for SSP Construction Team, Public and Leisure Building of the Year, Construction Manager of the Year, Joe Connell of Kier, UK Facade Awards, winner of the Most Sustainable Building of the Year, RCI Project of the Year, winner of winners, Chartered Institute of Architectural Technologists, winner of the award for excellence in architectural technology, large to mega projects. The Royal Institute of Town Planning Awards, finalist. UK Active Awards, finalist. Building Magazine Awards, finalist, and also Construction News. Regional Awards, winner for the Building of the Project of the Year Net Zero Award for the Construction Excellence Awards. Southwest Awards for Planning Excellence, joint winner of Best Project. Chairs, is that the one we shared with Plymouth? Yeah. Chairs Award, highly recommended. Exeter Property Awards, Civic Development, Commercial Development, and the Building Forum for Devon and Cornwall, Building of the Year. So just to set a little bit of context about, it didn't even win a White Elephant Award anywhere. I thought that one was going to come, but it didn't win that one. So we've got Agenda 22. Here you can see you've got 5 recommendations with regard to the funding. You can see them for yourselves. People are watching. This is an additional funding of £1.16449 in relation to the bus station in Sybil's Point, which is an increase of the original budget of 2.15%. funding of 1.75 million in relation to the COVID settlement for St Sybil's Point. And then we've got additional funding for Edwards Court, 363,385. Funding of £416,000 for the COVID settlement there. And these have been agreed with Keir, and I feel sure that Edwards Court, I will be reading out a list of awards for Edwards Court in due course. So I haven't forgotten them. So David, if you would like to talk to the funding, or is it you, JP, is it? Come on, JP, I've built you up here.
I have to use that tone. The construction of all three of these took place during the pandemic and all faced serious hurdles to overcome. To put it mildly, I think it's worth flagging that whilst we've got this platform. Just on a personal note, I'd like to pay tribute to the team. We've got a couple of the experts that have worked on it with us here today to answer your questions. We had over 2,500 construction workers working on St Sybil's Point alone. You can read the recommendations in front of you. I'm happy to take questions you might have. As I say, I've got colleagues here who will know intricate details if there are them. If they require answers that are commercially sensitive, I'll pause and seek guidance from the chair.
Thank you. Do I have some contributions? Councillor Moore.
Thank you, and congratulations on the awards. And I think you might need a special sign for the mega projects, because that's quite a good one to get. On recommendation 4, where's the money coming from? It's not spelled out on where these funds are coming from.
Anybody else? Anybody else with any contribution?
I would raise mine within part 2, just to be
fine. That's fine. You can do that, Councillor Jobson. Councillor Word and Josie, you'll come in at the end. Yeah, and then I've got a list of them there. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. I would have the honour of sitting in the seat to oversee St Sybil's coming online, and if anybody has tried to get anything done in the last few years, they know how difficult it is, and they know how everything seems to cost a shed load more than you thought it would. So looking at the tiny 2% increases in against budget is amazing, frankly. It's very, very difficult to get anything over the line at the moment. And when we were in, if you cast your minds back to when we were in 2020, getting your shopping in was difficult enough, let alone getting a building like that over the line. So yeah, I think obviously every penny we spend as a council has to be very carefully considered, but considering what we've achieved when we achieved it, I think that 2% is flipping impressive. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Morse.
Everybody goes on about St Sybil's Point, and we also make a big fuss about the bus station, but I recently have become an expert in care homes and elderly care, probably not for the best of reasons, and helped a resident of another care home look round Edwards Court the other week. And I have to say, I can remember sitting in meetings at the beginning where people showed us plans of what it was going to look like, and thinking that it all seemed a bit far-fetched, if I'm honest. It's a bit like St Sybil's Point. And walking around Edwards Court, it was everything we were promised and probably more. And I think because it doesn't have the award yet, and it maybe hasn't had the universal impact, because not everybody's going to be living in it, it should probably just have a couple of minutes of everybody listening to how wonderful it is, and what a beautiful facility it is, and the staff that are in there trying to turn it into that extra care that we wanted, and the views, apart from the energy from Waste Transfer Station, from the top of the building where people have their meals, is just incredible. So yes, St Sybil's Point is great. I've got my membership. I'm one of those people. And yes, the bus station has proved to be dramatic improvement on what was already there. But just because it's not in the public domain as much of other places, Edwards Court is incredible, and we should be very proud of what we've built.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Councillor Parkhurst.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that, well, echoing what Emma said and others have said about St Sybil's Point, that I think it's easy to kind of gloss over the fact that this is a city council pool and a city council facility, spa, creche, soft play, cafe, and you know, I'm yet to meet a resident who's especially when it first opened, who'd taken a tour and not kind of been blown away by the quality and what we're offering residents there. And I just wanted to share that you know, some testimonials from residents who've used St Sidwell's. So someone shares that I really love St Sidwell's Point. Having 2 pools means it's never busy and you always find time to swim. And since it's opened, I've started swimming regularly again, which has made a massive difference to my fitness and well-being. And another resident shares it's a great way to get me back into exercise after so many years. And another resident shares staff, brilliant, happy, cheerful, helpful, well organised, building well arranged, pleasure to see. And for me, it's a pleasure. To me, it works well, and thank you, City Council. And I think it's really worth just stressing the point that you know, this is improving people's, as I kind of mentioned earlier, physical activity in the city, improving people's health and well-being, and delivering for residents in Exeter. So yeah, the project to me is just something we can all be proud of.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Denning.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to reiterate what Councillor Wood has said. I think the people who did the negotiations for the payment were absolutely brilliant, spot on, hard work. However, in regard to Edwards Court, it does have an award. It has an award from all of the residents that live there. It's going to be one of the one said it was the best place they've ever lived in, and she was 99 or nearly 100. And you can't get a better award than that, Councillor Violet, can you? No. Thank you.
Anybody else? Well, just before I put it to the vote, whilst we're all waxing lyrical about portfolios we used to have, indeed, over 10 years ago, Councillor Edwards, our good friend, put this in my lap to work with. And I want to personally thank at this time, I've gone on about some awards, Phil Lewis, Justin Pickford and Emma Osmondson, well, Justin and Phil sat at the back. They had to put up with a lot of Pete shouting, me not so shouting so loud over when it failed, the budget failed once on it, but well, the contract failed. We even went up to Bristol to have meetings on that. So we've tried hard. I am so pleased that we managed to continue. And to be perfectly honest, my insight to galvanized bolts has never had so much sort of information thrown at me and the types of it. I really learned a lot. The guys sat at the back of the room really deserve our praise and thanks for continuing with the project at all times. And I was a bit worried on because I've been told we've not turned the heating on over there yet in St Sidwell's Point. I was worried on Sunday morning when I bumped into Phil Lewis in Wicks buying a radiator key, and I thought we had a major problem coming up, but it was most probably for his home. But I do say sincerely, guys, really appreciate that you stuck with it. I know people say we paid you, but you stuck with it when there was easy options that you could have given us not to do it. And there might have been a few people who would have said that was the best idea. However, I don't think they can say that now. So I think I'm more than happy to move it. Where the money is coming from, Councillor, we're quite clear. We won't be well, for the HRA, I assume it will come from the HRA budget, not from the our budget. And I can assure you, we will not be borrowing money to settle the bill. We will settle the bill in an appropriate way with money, which was for the purpose. And I'm so pleased that we can manage to do it at that sort of percentage increase. COVID, of course, that's who could have challenged that? Who would have known? It could have stopped quite easily throughout COVID, to be quite honest, quite easily. So I think it's important. So I'm going to move those recommendations from the chair. All those in favour?
That is unanimous, Chair. The recommendations have been carried.
Okay, so now we need to move into part two. So I'm going to move from the chair that we move into part two for the next item. Can I have a seconder, please? All those agree we move into part two? Okay.